I watched a video the other day by one of my favorite emerging baseball channels, I Like Numbers, in which he detailed 5 hitters that he thought were going to have some regression in 2026. I loved not only this idea, but the way he went about presenting it, which prompted a creative spark in me to do my own variation on this concept, which I'll be presenting today. Now, I'm not going to be doing any of the hitters he did in his video, as I thought he did a good job of explaining his logic. So instead, I'm going to be looking at 5 guys of my own who I think are going to have noticeable fall-offs in the upcoming season. This does not, however, mean that they're going to be bad overall, just that I believe they probably overperformed a bit in 2025, and more than likely don't project to have the same numbers going forward. I also saved my most controversial pick for last, so be sure to stick around for that. With this being said, let's get things started today with Dodgers outfielder Teoscar Hernandez. The first thing I want to acknowledge is that, yes, his fielding over the last 2 seasons has been absolutely horrible, which has sapped his WAR drastically, but I'm not going to be talking about that because this is a hitter video, which is going to go for pretty much every other player I discuss. Instead, let's discuss what he did at the plate last year, which included hitting 25 home runs and batting .247, .284, .454, coming out to an OPS of 738 and OPS plus of 103. These were not good relative to his career averages, but I still don't think they properly capture his degrading skill at the plate. Last season represented career worst totals in some very important metrics, including walk rate, with his 4.8% existing in the bottom 7% of all MLB hitters, and his expected WOBA on contact, WOBA, launch angle, average exit velocity, and barrel percent. But perhaps the even more concerning part to me is the horrible plate discipline, yielding that atrocious walk rate and a below average chase and whiff rate. After all, veteran hitters generally outpace father time through an advanced approach as their physical tools start to wither, which is certainly going to start being a factor for the soon-to-be 34-year-old. The last thing I wanted to discuss that's concerning is the general decline he's seen in his pulled air percent since 2021, which reached a career low 12.6% last year. This is one of the biggest predictors of home run production, which might help explain why, out of the 30 dingers he hit last year between the regular season and postseason, he was only expected to have hit 24.6, creating his personal largest gap ever in home runs to expected home runs. With all this being laid out, I really do think there's a chance he ends up with an under 700 OPS in 2026, and perhaps less than 20 long balls. Next up, I have 2025 All-Star Hunter Goodman, who was easily the best player on the Rockies last season, with his 31 homers having him tied for second amongst all MLB backstops behind just Cal Raleigh, and his 91 RBI having him place third. He also registered an impressive .520 slug, 843 OPS, and 120 OPS plus. Further, when you take a look at his Savant page, it certainly seems like these numbers would be at least semi-repeatable, as he ranks in at least the 72nd percentile in hard hit percent, expected slugging, barrel percent, and bat speed. Even his max exit velocity was 116.2, ranking in the top 3% of all MLB hitters. So, why does he find himself in this video? The obvious answer would seem to be in his plate discipline metrics, as the bottom 4 numbers in his Savant table were all pretty abysmal, with 2 out of the 4 being in the single digits. But that's not even specifically what I want to discuss, because I think he can outpace some of these issues due to how hard he impacts the ball and how much he pulls in the air, something that does differentiate him from Teoscar. No, instead, my main issue with him finding repeated success in 2026 comes down to what ended up being his relative success against breaking pitches, as he crushed 13 of his 31 dingers off of them, despite whiffing over 41% of the time, and outperforming his expected batting average by over 50 points, and expected slugging by over 100. Look at these 3 zone displays of his tendencies this past season. The highest amount of swings he registered were on pitches that were low and away, which also simultaneously housed numbers that were tied for his worst K percent and by far worst whiff percent at 72. He actually didn't have a single pitch type that he had a negative run value on, including offerings that generally find himself in those locations, like curveballs, which elicited a swing and miss nearly half of the time for him, and sliders, which he received the second most of any pitch type, with a whiff percent close to 40. As MLB pitchers continue to get the read on Hunter, they're going to dial up the breaking stuff in that location consistently. And as of now, when you couple that high chase rate with the swing and miss tendencies on those exact offerings, I'm not exactly bullish on his ability to get back into the mid-800s OPS territory, at least not without a major change in his approach. Our third hitter is Harrison Bader of the now San Francisco Giants. He might have the most straightforward case of obvious regression of anybody we'll look at today, as if you look at his numbers from his 2024 season, where he had an OPS in the mid-600s and an 86 OPS plus, and then from this past year, when he was at nearly 800 and 117, they don't really look all that different on an advanced basis, with improvements to his bat speed, walk rate, and barrel percent being the only obvious changes. And sure, these shouldn't go overlooked. They are tangible and could easily help him operate in that 700 OPS range, but I just simply don't think there's any way he gets even close to approaching 796 again. Look at his expected numbers from this past season. Not only did he see a decline in his expected WOBA, expected slug, and expected batting average, he also didn't see a notable increase in his average exit velocity, and he struck out almost 6% more than in 2024, and almost 10% more than back in 2023. Even if he is impacting the ball at more optimal angles, as evidenced by those barrel and hard hit numbers, it's going to be tough for him to replicate any degree of the same success if he's not actively putting the ball in play a ton, something that a player in his mold generally does. This becomes even more clear when we take a look at his production versus breaking pitches in 2025, as in a manner similar to Goodman, despite him having nearly a 40% whiff rate and average exit velocity under 84 miles an hour, he still managed to hit 11 of his total 17 homers against this group, outpacing his expected slug by nearly 100 points. Even a small regression back to the mean will result in quite a few less stingers, especially when you take into account that he actually didn't make any kind of tangible improvement to his pulled air percent, which has remained at a pretty good rate over the past 3 seasons, though in 2023 and 2024, they only yielded 19 homers combined. Our second to last player is going to be the recently traded second baseman Brandon Lowe. On the surface, this might seem like a poor pick, because outside of an outlier injury-shortened 2022, the lefty hasn't posted an OPS under 771 or an OPS plus worse than 112 in his last 5 years, while averaging about 30 home runs per full season played. Additionally, his advanced numbers in terms of quality of contact have remained relatively unchanged over this time frame. So why would I predict he's going to have a downslide in 2026? My reasoning is twofold, with the first aspect being similar to Hernandez, as he has had a massive decline in plate discipline over the last 3 seasons, which has led to a 3-year slide in expected on-base percentage, walk percent, whiff percent, and perhaps most notably, chase rate, which went from a pedestrian 39th percentile in 2023 all the way down to the 22nd in 2025. This creates a measure of volatility in his game that lends itself to massive year-to-year swings, and also doesn't insulate him very well against my second point, his simple change of scenery. In this past season, Lowe played at George M. Steinbrenner Field, a park that, per StatCast, was the 7th easiest place to hit a home run, at a mark of 112 where 100 is considered league average. Moreover, 4 of the 5 teams in his division played in parks that were among the top 10 easiest, including the Orioles and Blue Jays, which accounted for roughly a third of the home runs he hit on the year in total. He's now moving to a ballpark in PNC that was the absolute worst in terms of limiting the long ball in 2025, with a factor of 66, with the next closest being Busch Stadium at 77, which, by the way, is another place he has to spend a decent portion of his games at. In fact, none of the parks in the NL Central are ranked above 9th. For a guy who has made his living on pulling fly balls for power, this is going to be a pretty big change, and I think, when also paired with his declining plate discipline, could result in his worst full season to date. And finally, we come to easily my most controversial pick, Cal Raleigh of the Seattle Mariners. Now, before you get out your pitchforks and torches, hear me out. I'm not saying I don't think that Cal will be the best catcher in Major League Baseball in 2026. I do. In fact, I think there's a decent chance he gets over 40 home runs again, but I really don't see a world where he gets close to the 65 that he crushed last year between the regular season and playoffs. The first bit of reasoning I'm going to give for this is the ridiculously high pulled air percent he managed to register last year, coming in at 38.4%, more than 6% higher than at any other point in his career. This also came with a ground ball rate that was by far the lowest he'd ever posted. Now, while it is a skill that you can hone to be able to pull fly balls in the air, this kind of massive year-over-year jump, to me, screams, at least in part, outlier, especially when considering that it was the 3rd highest among any MLB player since 2021. But even if you want to assume that he's going to be able to keep up this pace going forward, I would then point you to his home runs hit versus expected home runs in 2025. That's right, he actually led all of Major League Baseball in overperforming what he was estimated to achieve. This was due in part to a fairly pedestrian no-doubter percent of 44.6, below guys like Spencer Torkelson and Zach Neto. A big reason for this was the 15 doubters that he hit, or long balls that would be so in just 1 to 7 big league ballparks, which was tied for 3rd most in the league. For little context on some of the players that surrounded him in total homers, only Shohei was in the same territory in the top 5 of actual homers hit, and he had a superior no-doubter percent of 47.6. The last stat I'll give concerning his relative luck is his 25.3% home run to fly ball ratio. This isn't even all that ridiculous of a number. There are other exceptionally powerful players, like Aaron Judge for example, that managed to surpass marks like this routinely. But when you see that this was over 6% higher than he personally had ever posted in a season, despite the fact that his quality of contact metrics were better, but not that much drastically better than what he had posted in previous seasons, it makes it clear that even reaching 50 home runs again might be a tall task, let alone 60. Again, this is not to say he's not going to be an MVP contender in 2026, but the total amount of home runs he's going to hit is almost certainly going to decline by a notable amount. Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.